Hi, I'm Marlene Gebauer from the Geek and Review, and I have Nikki Shaver for Legal Technology Hub here. And Nikki, you're going to tell us a little bit about some events in London, right?
That's exactly right. So, all of your many listeners, I'm sure Marlene and Greg in London town have a delight coming to them. We are bringing our LTH Velocity and Horizons conferences over the pond. We held our flagship Horizons event there last year as well, and it was really successful and sold out. And we're bringing that one back and also adding in Velocity, which is our conference for vendors. This, as you know, is a time when people are still learning and there's so much happening every single day. It seems like there's a lot to figure out. And that's as much on the vendor side as it is on the law firm side. Often vendors don't really have a sense of community. There are not events that cater specifically for vendors. But Velocity is exactly that. It is an event for any legal tech vendor to enable them to come along for free to a day of very high quality content put on by Legal Tech Hub and a range of speakers from the London region, talking about things like how to prepare your company for exit, hearing from investors on what they're looking for in the market, what the impact was of the Anthropic entry or perceived market entry on the legal market, and what buyers want to see from vendors, how you can sell better to law firms. So, highly recommend that one. And the following day, on April 24th, we are having our Horizons event, which is an event for predominantly buy side law firms and corporate legal departments on all of the major topics that are of particular interest for us today around things like increasing complexity around agentic systems and orchestration layers and how to handle, again, the anthropic market entry and what that might mean, and whether vibe coding is actually the future of legal AI. So we are really excited. Again, those dates are April 23rd for Velocity, April 24th for Horizons. We welcome anyone who lives in and about London, but also anyone visiting in the area. There is still time to sign up. Velocity is free. Horizons is kept deliberately low because we really want to have these high quality discussions, and we'd love for you to be able to bring your team. So go to legaltechnologyhub.com. Drop down on our top menu for events will take you to the LTH events page, and you can find out more and sign up for our events there. Thanks, Marlene.
You're welcome. That sounds like a great couple of events.
Should be.
Geek and Review, the podcast focused on innovative and creative ideas in the legal profession. I'm Marlene Gebauer.
And I'm Greg Lambert. And this week, Marlene and I got back from Dallas, and we wanted to do a kind of a recap on an event organized by Cosmonauts and LegalOps.com. Joy Heath-Rush from ILTA chaired the day one, and it really focused mostly on private practice. And then Connie Brenton came in on day two from LegalOps.com and talked about the in-house community.
And I feel this conference stood out, Texas Trailblazers, because, it stayed really close to the work. So you didn't have a lot of, future gazing and what's next. It was more about sort of the day-to-day soup of legal practice, where AI is actually helping and where the economics are being impacted.
Yeah, and it's hard enough right now just to figure out where we are now without having to go, well, where are we going to be in 6 to 12 months? So I thought it was really good to kind of focus in on where we are. And day one with the law firm focus, it kicked off with Joy Heath-Rush talked about where she was seeing the industry currently, and then Rowan McNamee from Mary Technology introduced us to the term, which I've seen floating around now, called cognitive surrender.
Not to be confused with cheap trick surrender.
Yeah, that's a whole different
That's a whole different
cognitive
surrender.
surrender song there. But it's basically where you are over trusting the AI and you're offloading that cognitive load to the AI. And I know that we talk about, oh, well, just review what the AI puts out. But if everyone's being honest with themselves, there's a lot of times where we just kinda take what the AI hands us and say, "Oh, that looks great." So, I like that. Let's, talk about that. Marlene, do you see, looking back at that keynote, that it's not so much that firms have a technology problem as much as we've got a workflow design problem? Kinda you know, makes the attorneys and others not offload, that work completely to the AI.
Exactly. Like, this is exactly where we talk about, making sure there's a human in the loop and sort of building that in to, any type of workflow or review that, is happening using AI. Because again, it sounds so good. It's just really easy to just kind of say, yeah, just use it. But I think the smart organizations, are basically incorporating this kind of education into their, education programs for people who are using this. They incorporate it into their governance plans that, there is always human review. Everything is AI assisted, not AI done completely. People, just sort of build in and even bring in the people who are responsible to say, oh, if you're building a workflow, like where does this make sense? Where is their need for human review at which points of this, of this action, and just making sure that everybody who does that is aware of it.
Yeah, I was, talking about this with my wife on the way in to work, and she's a elementary school librarian, and she kinda had that thousand-yard stare in her eye, and I was like, "Well, what's going on?" She's like, "Oh my god, this we're having the same problem with, teaching the children not to completely rely upon the AI, and it's really changing the way that we're educating." I mean, I always tease to her that, there's a lot of similarities between law firm lawyers and elementary and middle school children, but, I think this is something that, as we're developing the systems, that we have to be careful that it doesn't look like we're just giving them the answer,
Mhm.
and that's gonna be really, really hard to do, especially as the
It's a
tools get
lift. It's
better and
it's
better.
not it's not a complete, solution. It helps a little bit, but it's not the end solution. And I think there's also a similarity, just, the population in general, and what you're saying is that you have some folks that are just like, no, 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 like I don't want to use this, I don't trust it. And then you have other people who are just sort of jumping into the deep end of the pool before learning how to swim. I
Yeah.
know, like, my son is in one son is in high school, and he is it's quite interesting conversations at home because he is adamant that, like, it should not be used. And I'm like, "This is my job, man." So, yeah, I think that there's a lot of kind of similarities across the board in what they were talking about.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we thought, filing hallucinated cases was a problem. I think that
Over
we've got
800
other
now.
problems that are
Over
they're
800 in the
coming down the
US
pipe.
now, every
All
day.
right. Well, the another panel, which had Kelly Lugo from BCLP, and then there was another one with Chad Barton from Holland and Knight, and they kind of mentioned the associate problem and this incentives of using the AI and whether or not things are really inverted. And so on there was an automation in action panel where they're asking, are firms really finally kind of getting honest about, how partner compensation and associated billing targets either accelerate or, kill AI adoption. And it's an on. I thought it was a great conversation that everyone was having about, how do you convince an associate that they need to learn the AI if you're also hearing things about, well, the associate, this can take 50% of the associate's work away. What's the incentive for them to do?
Yeah, it's funny. It's like one of the things I said on the panel I was on was like, AI doesn't kill the billable hour, but it does expose its limits. And
Yeah.
I think this is one of those times. I think we're really kind of at a crossroads where the smart firms are really going to have to start looking closely at, where AI is impacting, and, get with their pricing teams and figure out how they're going to do this because, again, AI is something that makes you efficient, and, the billable hour is, it's kind of in direct opposition to the billable hour. So, while there may remain things that make sense, for hourly billing, the smart firms really have to start looking at this and pricing and talking to their clients about, what's valuable, what's value worth, because, otherwise, you come up against this type of brick wall that we've had for many years, where anything that's making work efficient, nobody wants to, no one wants to adopt it because it's just gonna, hurt their pocketbook in the end.
Yeah.
And I mean, things like of
Yep.
innovation, innovation hours and things are great and they count, but, in the end, you're still kind of at odds.
Yeah, the one thing that I heard on both days was a reference to the hopefully I say this right, the Javits paradox, where it talked about the more efficient and cheaper something gets, that actually the more people use it, and I think people are looking at legal services this way, that if there's a lot of pent up demand that I think clients would love for law firms to do more work for them, but the cost and time is prohibitive. So if you can get the, cost and time down, does that kick in the Javits paradox to say there would just be more demand? And I think the thing that even if that happens, I think the idea that we really start needing, or thought process that we need to start doing is, okay, well, how do we deal with that? How, because right now, I actually had someone ask me, it's like, are you looking at reducing, the number of associates that
Yeah,
you
that
hire
was a
over the next
question
few
that
years?
was put out there, yeah.
And so I don't, obviously, I think the industry is going to change. I think the ability to just purely bill by time and set your value by time is obviously going to change. I just don't know that law firms are making a serious thought about what does that really mean, and how do we kind of prepare ourselves for what's coming?
And I think it needs to be quick. I mean, what we were hearing, like, this needs to be quick. There wasn't really discussion about, like, what type of work we're gonna sort of bring back in-house, but, I know those conversations are happening, and I know, in-house groups are looking at tools that they can take some of this work back in. So, firms are really poised. It's like it's a really important moment right now for firms to really kind of jump on this and be able to sort of sell the fact that, look, we've invested in all of these things and we can do these things for you, and sort of take the load off of you.
Yeah. Yeah, and kinda in that same vein, Kyle Poe, from Legora, he gave both a standalone presentation, and he was on the panel with me, and he talked about this that the conversation in 2026 going forward is, shifts from how fast is this tool, how fast can it get me to an answer, to the question of, okay, now how do we price this new value that we're setting up? And it's definitely a very difficult question that law firms and pricing professionals and in-house are having to face, because Kyle, in the same, I think in the same instance, also talked about, well, law firms now would love to go to flat fee rates, that work for them, so that we can really kind of focus in on the efficiency. And now he's saying he's hearing clients saying, "Whoa, if it's gonna be less hours, maybe I just wanna pay by the hour and I just pay you less." So it's interesting to see where these 2 competing factors are gonna meet in the next couple of years.
Yeah, a couple things. Like, I mean, he's saying how fast is, moving from how fast is the tool to how do we price the new value. So it's clearly we're starting to move from like, how do we experiment with this thing? How does it work? To, okay, how is it truly impacting work and how is it impacting the price of work? The other question is, and it kind of goes to his point about, well, maybe we'll just, pay hourly and just pay less hourly. But, you know, I, one of the things that came up was that the value is still there. It's just the time that's spent is less.
Yeah.
So, how do we figure out what value actually means? And, is it just the time spent? Is it the outcome? Is it the fact that you get insights faster, you resolve things faster, and everyone gets back to normal work. All of those things have a price point. So it's an opportune time, I think, for clients and firms to really talk about it, like, have an honest conversation about it, no more, like, hourly and discount. Let's really talk about, like, what is important to you, what do we need? Yeah.
Well, it was interesting because we moved from day one focused on, the way law firms are viewing this, and then we moved to day two. And I will say one thing that was talked about a lot, and I think Joy mentioned this on day one, and I think it was mentioned as well on day two with Connie, was that there's a lot of power in the hands of the in-house lawyers and general counsel of the clients. And it wasn't until I was reviewing my notes and drafting the recap on the Substack page that I realized there were a lot of there were not a lot of in-house attorneys that showed up for day 2. It was a large crowd, but there were lots of legal ops people. I think there were still a number of law firm people that were there, but
Mhm.
at least on the panels and the discussion that was coming from the stage, it was a noticeable absence of the in-house attorneys on day 2, and so you've got this belief that, there's a lot of power in the hands of the people, and they weren't there. It was
Mhm.
kinda weird.
I hear mixed things. It's like, I hear like, oh, clients are, very far ahead in this area. And then I hear clients are not far ahead in this area. So I think it would have been really helpful to me to be able to sort of talk to some of these people and be like, hey, so where are you guys in your journey? And, get some, actual feedback on that.
Yeah, well, if you are an in-house attorney and you're listening, to this,
Come talk to
uh,
us.
yeah, come to the table. Come on,
We want to
we
hear from you.
people are begging to hear from you. They
You
they
really
want
are.
really want direction. Um, it was good to see Connie on day 2
Yep.
kick things off, and she had a really good opening discussion where she really kind of did put the impetus on, it is time to for people to stop talking and time for some real transformations to go. And it kicked off John Lambert from who's general counsel at Harvey, and he had an interesting talk. He also brought up the paradox and kind of where Harvey is and how he's using AI tools in his day to day. Now there was something to his credit, he did say he was gonna test this out on a non-Silicon Valley audience, and I, for one, I didn't get a chance because he immediately took off back to California after his talk, but he compared lawyers to software engineers, and he said he did want to see how this went over with this group. So, John, hopefully you're listening, and let me give you my opinion. And I thought, and I talked with Joy Heath Rush afterwards as well, and she did too. That he got to the point, but the way that he got to the point was didn't really land, and
Agreed
that
with the
was
end result, but didn't agree with the
yeah.
analysis. Yes.
Exactly. So he was saying that essentially that lawyers and computer software engineers essentially do the same type of work. That they get to an output, um, and and I really kind of thought it was a good try, but
Don't tell
the
lawyers that.
outputs that computer engineers have and the outputs that lawyers have, one can be independently validated for correctness. Software code either works or it doesn't work,
It's a
whereas
product.
yeah, it's a product.
You're making something work or not work.
Yeah, and I thought because I know what he was doing, and you hear this a lot, and it almost doesn't matter what industry, is that AI has solved for computer code. That seems to be an admission in the industry that you hear it, from Anthropic, that they don't even their coders don't even look at the code anymore. They look at the results, and the results work, then there's no need to edit the code. And so with engineers, they're getting to this point now where their jobs have shifted more from the writing of the code to more the coordination of the events that are going on and making sure that everyone is on track for what it is that they need to accomplish. And so the engineers' jobs have changed, and it's really interesting because product managers now see themselves almost as quasi engineers, and engineers now see themselves as quasi product managers. And there's this kind of what I've heard, you hear T-shaped lawyer, right, where you're broad across the board on multiple skills, and then you go dive deep, in one
Into the
skill.
legal into
And I've heard it, the kind of sideways or F, where
there's the
you're still
T, there's the
broad
D,
in
yeah.
multiple areas, and then you're like deep in one or two or 3 areas, and that's going to be kind of the new normal. And I think that part is going to transfer over to legal as well, to where, yeah, you can be really a really good corporate lawyer, but you're also gonna have to be knowledgeable in 1 or 2 more areas, especially in using the technology that you have.
Just being a legally good expert from, from basically legal advice. We're already seeing that that is not enough. I mean, you have to know your client's business, you have to understand the technology you're using, all of those things. I mean, I agree with him that, and we talked to Joy about this, that they're both problem engineers and lawyers are both problem solvers. They're both critical thinkers. But, as you said before, you're trying to doing code, you're trying to make something work. Now, your client can come to you and say, I want this result, but a lot of that is out of your hands. It's like, I want a deal to come out like this. It's like, well, there's a negotiation process that takes place. And, or, I want a specific outcome in litigation. It's like, well, that there's a million factors that could impact that, your jurisdiction, your judge, if you have a jury, how impressive your argument is, how strong your argument is. So there's just a lot of things that I think, when you're offering a service, are a little different.
Yeah, I agree. So we'll just ask John to sharpen his pencil and then come back with another analogy, at least outside of Silicon Valley. So one of the things from day 2 that was really interesting that I thought, and there were some in-house lawyers on this, but it was more on operations than it was on actual practice, was the practical use cases. And there were some really good actual use cases that were talked about. Justin Schwartz from Epiroc, he talked about one of my favorite topics is the 50 state survey, or he referred to it as just the multiple state survey, and where he asked his outside counsel, um, if they used AI, what would a $10,000 multi-state survey cost? And he said, one, the outside counsel was surprised that they were allowing them to use the AI to do this, because other clients refused to let them do it. And so they came back, and he said, it went from a $10,000 cost to a $5,000 cost. And I think both sides were very happy to do that. I think 50 state surveys are one of those things that clients want, that they need in order to, especially if they're in,
Regulatory, yeah.
yeah, regulatory,
Mhm.
but they're super expensive. And quite frankly, it's not the favorite thing for lawyers to do. They don't like pulling these things together
I
either.
don't think we
So
liked doing it when we we had to do it in the library, so
I do
a lot of
not.
work, a lot of
So
work.
I thought that was really interesting to again, they talked to each other. They said, "Okay, I want this, but I don't wanna pay that much for it." And you say, "Well, if you're gonna make us do it by, the old way, that's what it cost. If you let us do it the new way, then, we're happy with half of that cost because it probably takes us half or less that time, to do it." So,
Yeah, that
um
was what I liked about it too, the fact that they kinda had that conversation. I think it also opens up the opportunity to address work that just, never got done because it just didn't make economic sense. And so if this is a pain point for a client, like now you have an opportunity like these 50 state surveys. I mean, the time that it takes now is, compared to when we used to do it, like we it's like days. And I mean, that was a while ago, so it didn't take days, when they were comparing now, but still it took a lot more time. And now this is something that they can probably offer on a regular basis and an updated basis, whereas, maybe this wasn't all the time before because it's just the cost was in the way. But, any of these types of things where we have broadened our abilities based on AI, that's definitely a conversation to have, between clients and firms to just see it's like where can we do more?
yeah. One other example that I wanted to highlight because I think this is something that it kind of expands a little bit from the multi-state surveys. Michael Vucinas, from Phillips 66 shared how, you know, th their company has all of these rights away, and I think he was saying there was, like, over 250,000 of these that they had documents that
They can
explained what the
the
rights
gas,
away
get
were.
to the pumps and stuff, right?
And what was interesting, and I don't know that, if you weren't listening closely, if you caught it, he was basically saying, "This is work that we would love to have done, but there's no way we can do it." And so they actually took all of their documents that showed the rights of way and uploaded them into the AI system and extracted all of that information. And he said it saved them well over $1 million in cost to do that. But the key thing was they probably didn't even do it beforehand because the cost was so high. So, now they at least know what their risks are and we're able to get to that in an easy way. So this is work that wasn't getting done because of cost and now it is getting done. So I think, it just
Yeah.
shows an example of, if it's cheap enough, what all you can do.
It's either, not getting done or getting done piecemeal on an as-need basis, and, what a wonderful example of being able to kind of extract, information like, trends or, different types of language and, what's happening over time and being able to, to see, okay, what should we be paying attention to? What are the risk factors here or what do we need to change? And then being able to sort of change that en masse.
Yeah. Yeah. And the last one I wanted to highlight was Elizabeth Poole from Boomi. I like she had some really good examples, but the one and this one's, was close to my heart, and that was she developed a way of taking the intake system and revamping it using a combination of SharePoint and Copilot, and she said her budget to do this was 0. That's the ultimate, this is the vibe coding
That's the ultimate
example.
incentivizer.
Yeah,
It's like, figure out
so
something, I have no money.
yeah, well, necessity is the mother of invention, and
Mhm.
when you got no budget, you got all kinds of necessity.
I love these types of examples where it's like, I had a matchbox and and, and a rubber band and, like, I made something amazing.
Yep.
And so you just basically use what you have, and it's just a real example of, the creative abilities of people and organizations, when they're kinda tech curious and saying, "Okay, we have what we have, like, how can we make this work to solve the problem?"
As long as they stay tech curious and not tech furious.
No tech furious.
Sorry, little Scott Pilgrim, all right,
Nothing wrong with referencing Scott Pilgrim.
there's nothing wrong with that. Our friend, moving on to another panel, or actually this was a standalone presentation that guest on the Geek and Review, Christina
I
Sakunis
love that she was there.
talked about. So she got up and talked about the upcoming report that she's putting out on the industry and pricing and how much customers are or how much clients are paying from Council Link. She talked I had to feel sorry for her because she's been on, I think, since about 2020.
Yeah.
So maybe the past 6 years on and off, and I always see this, like, hope in her eye, and then I talk about the flat rate and,
Someone's gonna
alternative fees, and it's like, "Christina, where are we this year?" And she's like, "Oh, I thought we were gonna
Sorry.
go up, but here we are again, right at about 10%,
Alright,
for
guys, we gotta make it
AFAs."
work for Christina. Everybody
Yeah,
chip in.
come
We wanna
on,
make her
she's super
smile.
nice. Make Chris happy.
No,
But, she was talking about the fact that, while AI may be making production cheaper, there's a new normal in fee rates, raising them. And she pointed out that before 2022, that on average, the rates, and this is a blended amount on how they measure it, was around 3%.
mhm.
She said about 2022 and after, that has jumped to 5%. And I know I looked around because people were like, "That seems low," because I think we were like at 10%. So she mentioned again, the way they measured it, it came out to that, but it was still a huge increase from 3% to 5% is large. I think if my math is right, that's a 60% increase
Mhm.
year over year of what you were paying. And one of the things that an audience member had asked her is like, well, in 2 or 3 years, what's your
What
next
what we
prediction?
do for another one.
And she said, well, if we could normalize 5%, they're going to be a push to normalize 7%, or more.
It's
And it's going
it's
to be
re
interesting.
it's really interesting based on, like, what we were just talking about before, like, okay, are we really gonna have, like, these heartfelt conversations about what value is, and are we really gonna try and adjust this model and in a way that makes sense now? I mean, the billable hour made sense years and years ago because it was a real easy way to measure. But, AI has come and disrupted that. So, it's not a good way to measure anymore, but yet everybody's so invested in it. Are we going to have those conversations? Are we going to make those adjustments to really reflect what the value is and what the cost should be? Or are we just going to like up rates and then just spend less time? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, The another panel, which was really interesting because they had people from Google, AT&T, Stryker. They brought up an issue that was really interesting about the challenge of being able to add AI into the process, but not make it unnecessarily complex in the existing tech stacks. And I think one of the things that a lot of us, especially on our side of things, Marlene, or on the legal ops side, is that if we start allowing individuals to create their own software to correct their one problem that they're facing, is how do you manage that? How do you govern that? I mean, you don't
Real
want to tamp down the
questions.
creativity, but man, it could get complex quick.
I mean, we're having enough trouble like with governance, just like with all of the changes that are happening. And it's like we're finally, I think, at a fairly decent point where we have our arms around it a little bit. I mean, but there's still questions to be answered. But can you imagine every time somebody builds some small solution that's, for a small practice group or an individual, okay, are we going to have to sort of are they going to have to go through sort of an approval process like we have to do with just, general use of these AI tools? And I- I'm 100% unnecessary complexity. It's like, as long as it's complex, people don't adopt it. If it's easy, people do. And it's the same thing with your tech stacks. Like, if it's easy to bring in, and maybe bring out, then there's much more appetite for it.
Yeah.
So I mean, maybe this is where you see the MCP coming in too.
Yeah. Um, uh, it was kind of interesting because we kind of almost came full circle because Richard Gorlick from Chrono Tracer out of Austin
Mhm.
um, had this kind of warning about the lawyer freak out of 2027, and he kind of brought the same issue that John Lambert from Harvey did with, okay, we're seeing substantial changes in certain industries like computer programming and computer engineering. We know it's going to happen in legal in some way, that things are going to significantly change. And, so he was talking about, and I think he even brought up, like, the 5 stages of grief, that AI, and that was not the first time I had heard
Yeah,
that,
I've
but,
I've heard that
it's
too.
like, it's like denial, and then, and you go through all the,
Sadness.
yeah, and then finally acceptance at the end. But, again, I think that that talks more about uh, and I can bring back my favorite saying is, all problems are communication problems. And if you're not having those conversations now to at least be prepared for things and not have that conversation when it's too late, uh, I think that's the advice that I think we kinda all walked away with, but if not, that's the advice that I'm giving everybody now is it's like, if you're not having those conversations now, when it is an emergency, it's too late.
Yeah.
Uh,
I mean, it is absolutely critical that internally we're having these conversations with, everybody who's impacted. And it's funny, I was on a webinar this morning, and it was talking about sort of training and education. And, part of the discussion is about, well, it's, you're just sort of training people how to use things, but it goes much further than that. I mean, we have to be very, very transparent. We have to teach people about what it does and doesn't do. We have to teach, the governance aspects of it, and establish guardrails so people are, comfortable with it. We have to be sharing use cases, within departments and across departments, particularly the ones that have significant impact, scalable, repeatable. Because you're right, it's like, and he's right. Like, it's coming. We all know it's coming, and so we have to do the best we can. And that's kind of what our jobs are, is to sort of prepare people and get them comfortable as much as we can with it. And it's funny, like, I will say that sometimes in my experience, like, the ones who are grumbling about it are often the ones who use it pretty well. So, they get it. So but I have good hope for that. I think that again, the fact that we're having the discussions right now, I think makes a lot of difference.
yeah. Well, I wanna do just a quick bonus topic here, and that's there was a couple of presentations, one from, Harry St. John from, Legora. Harry's the VP of Revenue, and then the one that probably came out of left field the most was John Risner, who's head of AI at legal drafting for, Filevine. And this one was like the dream for the librarian in me because one, Harry introduced, and I think he was kind of like not going to introduce it, but my hand shot up immediately when I saw it. And that is Legora is introducing a legal research option on their
Mhm.
platform, which is going to be very interesting because I think we've said this before. I think a lot of people think that AI is a like a magic bullet for legal research, and I'm here to tell you if you haven't done legal research in a while, legal research is really, really hard to
To
do.
get right.
Complicated and it's hard to get right. And so it's interesting to see that pop up on that because I actually had I was talking with a venture capitalist. They were asking, "Well, do you think the Harveys and Lagoras are gonna go after legal research?" And I was like, "No, they may
Really?
plug it in, but I don't see them
No,
going."
they are.
I guess I was wrong. So, but
I don't know I don't
really
know
the
I
oh,
don't know
good.
why, just for 1 second, like, I don't know why, like, but research for the longest time has sort of been like the holy grail for all of these AI companies. Like, I don't know why, like, we've had this conversation, like, why are you going after the hardest thing?
Yeah.
It's like,
Well,
go after the
you
easy stuff first.
to their credit, Harvey and Lagora didn't attack it first like, Westlaw and Lexus
Well,
did,
yeah, but
but, but also Westlaw and Lexus, that was their, that's their bread and butter. So,
there are other companies that have popped up,
oh, yeah.
smaller companies. I mean, Midpage being one of them, and Wexler, I
Yeah.
think, is another
Well,
one
if
where it's there. That's what they're focused on.
I will tell you this, if legal research could be solved by just having the case law,
Yeah,
then we'd all be using, Google Scholar for all of our work.
I agree.
And
Agree.
I'm here to tell you, unless you're an academic and you just, you need access to the core cases, it's much more
Yeah,
complicated than that if you're actually doing real live legal research for real life clients.
but it'll be
But I did want to point out John Risner from Filevine because this was a law librarian's dream
the
presentation.
Riz presentation, man,
The
it was
ri
good. It was really good.
Oh my
I know
goodness,
both of us were like, "Where did this come from?" Right?
it was
Just popped up.
awesome, but yeah, I think
It
this
was
one
awesome.
was the most out of left field presentation because
Yes.
he had talked about, we laugh when we talk about these stories of,
People are gonna hate this when you tell them. It's like they're
lawyers
gonna hate
who
to hear this.
have cited to hallucinated cases that, have bad citations in
Yes.
their documents, and I'm here to tell you
Awful stuff.
that was happening before AI was a thing.
It
People
was.
were, putting in wrong citations, bad citations, using the, incorrect, quotes and incorrect analysis. That
Companies
is not an
didn't have
AI
citations that they
phenomenon.
should have had, it's like or mismatched citations. Yeah, it was
But
always
he had
happening.
actually gone through and did a really deep dive on American case law and just how much it's
And
like how much
citators.
Shepherds and Keysight and B law, the citator systems, it's like they don't even agree with each other.
The bad news is, like, they don't agree, and they have significant error, and it's like, great. And it plays well into, like, a conversation I've been having with librarians and I was having with you. It's just like, okay, so how, like, because again, it goes back to these hallucination cases, like, now everybody's got their eyes on that, and so what is the appropriate way to check your citations? Because not
Yeah.
only do you have to check to make sure the citation is correct, you have to make sure that the content in the citation is correct. And if it's a, key number that is referring back to the right thing. And yes, and all of these tools, if they're grounded appropriately, you can go back and look at the actual document. But, like, we've been trying to get away from that for, like, years and years and years, and so that's what Shepard's was for. That's what West Check was for, uh, was so you didn't have to do that, and now you find that they're wrong, and then this is also wrong. So it's
Yeah.
like, what are we supposed to do?
Yeah, well, I think it's one
Somebody
more
tell me.
thing
No,
that
this is a serious question. I want to know.
well, the death of the law librarian has been greatly over exaggerated over the years. I think that one more example of why it takes somebody really smart to keep on top of these vendors that think they've created the easy button for legal research. And
Exactly.
well, I thought it was a great conference. What's your final thoughts on this one, Marlene?
I think, if there's one common thread, it's nobody's waiting for perfect clarity anymore, and that would be a
Yeah.
mistake if you do. People are building, they're testing in real time, they're looking to find solutions that are bringing true value.
Yeah. Well, and one, I think, they're not waiting for it to be perfect before they start testing it. You're seeing that in the vendors.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
iteration is now the way. We used to laugh, we used to go to AALL or ILTA to see what the big change was for the year, and now it's like every week there's a big change.
And this is why horizon scanning is so important nowadays because again, you have to see kind of what's being out there, what's being built and what sort of new angle is there that maybe isn't being addressed other places.
Yeah, yeah, and my takeaway, and is both with the conference and a lot of things that I'm hearing across not just our industry, but just across society. There's lots of things that AI can do right now, but our culture and our businesses and just the way that we're structured, there's a huge gulf between what's possible and what's doable. And it's we're still trying to work out the doable while the possible just keeps going further and further away. So I think just like we said earlier, it's, the key right here is having these conversations now, working with the tools now, and even with all of the, the warts and all of getting in there and, kind of at least trying to advance with the technology so that it doesn't, you don't get just completely left behind, but also so that it gives you that time to also ingest what this means for you as an individual and you within a profession and where that goes. If you're not talking about it, if you're not working with the tools and experimenting and investigating, good luck to you.
Well, I think Texas Trailblazers gave us a great shot, a snapshot of the transitions that
Yeah.
are happening right now. So thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah.
And as always, the music you hear is from Jerry David DeSica. Bye, everybody.
All right. Thanks, Jerry. Bye.